All right, I'm going to get into all the politics of last night's budget in a moment. Plenty of financial detail. I want to make sure that you are across. And to help me do that, let's bring in our budget guru, Sky News Business Editor Ross Greenwood. Well, Ross, this is a bit like a grand final for you, budget week. I want to get your top line summary if I can. What are your big takeaways from the budget?
I guess the reality is it's what it does to inflation and therefore the pressure that the government is putting onto the Reserve Bank by saying that basically it can continue to spend at a significant rate, but at the same time also allege that it's going to reduce inflation during that time. Now, the real worry of that is that the inflation reduction could come around as a result of a significant fall in Australia's economy and at the same time a rise in the unemployment rate. And that's not good for families, not good for the government, it's not good for the nation. So you really hope that's not the case. But if you go even to the $300 sort of handouts to every household for energy relief, well, in that particular case, you know, the reason why that is said to be not inflationary is because if you do take it out, it's part of the CPI, same as rental assistance as well. And so what you're starting to see is a real divergence between where the Reserve Bank thinks inflation, economic growth, employment is going to go to in the future. And you can see it here. But one thing to recognise is that the Reserve Bank has effectively come out with its own forecasts just a week ago. So it's not as though these are, you know, history somewhere in the distant past. These are very fresh forecasts from the Reserve Bank, and this is at odds in many ways with where the government and Treasury think our economy is going to.
Do you think because the government have just appointed the new governor that they think that perhaps she's not as independent as previous governors, that they can sort of, from the bully pulpit of politics, talk her into keeping rates where they are now, not perhaps increasing them? Because I think that's the tussle that's going on at the moment. We've seen the Treasurer in the last 4 or 5 days really talk down the ability of the RBA to get these inflation forecasts right. He's talking out Treasury, getting them right. And the tussle, I mean, I called it just then in the editorial, it's like the government's got its foot on the accelerator, the RBA's got its foot on the brake, and we know that's a car crash.
I've got to tell you, that's the reality. But then go back to the basics of this. You cannot spend this much money, plus having tax cuts coming, which are worth close on $25 billion, without having people spend the money. I mean, it's pretty basic. If you get the money and all of a sudden there's a cost of living crisis, you are going to consume that money. You need to. And so this is what families around Australia will do. This is what businesses around Australia will do. And so as a result, guess what? The temptation will be there for business to raise prices or to hold prices, not to cut prices, knowing that this money is coming towards them. What does that do for inflation? It doesn't bring it down. It's got to leave it exactly where it is or maybe have it to rise. And as I say, the real drama of this is if you do believe that inflation is going to come down, it will probably come at the cost of economic growth. And therefore, as a result, unemployment starts to rise. And heaven help me if I think that a Labor government were actually encouraging employers, large and small, to shed workers. That should be the basic mantra of a Labor government. But that is also potentially an Achilles heel for this government if that is starting to unwind and unemployment starting to rise as you get out towards an election later this year or into next year.
And if it gets tough paying your mortgage now, given how much rates have gone up, it's impossible if you lose your job. One of the things that I think is really interesting in the budget, this is a budget where government spending as a share of the economy is forecast to rise to its highest levels outside the pandemic in 40 years. So the deficits ahead of us, they are all structural. Now, explain what that means for taxpayers.
So let's say, for example, if I'm going to give you a good example of this is the $300. The $300 effectively comes and goes. But then if you go out and you say give wage rises to certain parts of the economy, if you give tax cuts to the economy, that's baked in. That's not easily able to be clawed back by government. Now, it can be, but it will come at a political cost. And so what you can see here with the outlooks from where they were in 2023, then looking out into those out years, years, you can see how significant those budget deficits are. So they mount. So what that means is if we go to some of the fastest growing pieces of expenditure in the government's sort of book right now, we're talking about interest costs rising basically 10%. We're talking about the NDIS rising more than 9%. So there are big areas of this budget that simply are very hard for the government to be able to control. And so really that means they've got to find more taxes, which is a reason, as you point out, that not only is this government a big spending government, but it's also a very big taxing government as well, largely as a result of bracket creep, where inflation has pushed people into higher tax brackets. And so when they say we're giving you these tax cuts back, remember, this is your money. It's not actually the government's money, it's your money they're virtually returning to you, courtesy of what has been the high inflation and the tax system pushing you into higher tax rates as well.
This Future Band Australia scheme, they like to paint it as a manufacturing scheme. It's not really. It's predominantly fixated on green projects. And when you look at the detail, when you look at who is getting up in these grants, I mean, it's a cash cow for billionaires. If they want to back green energy, people like Twiggy Forrest, Malcolm Turnbull and others, what's wrong with using their own money?
Well, there's nothing wrong with that at all. And in fact, the reality is that this is almost a carrot and stick approach that the government's got, because this money that they've put, $22.7 billion over 10 years, I press the Treasurer on this. Is it on balance sheet, off balance sheet? What he concedes is effectively it's production credits that those in critical minerals and green hydrogen are going to receive. So they don't actually receive the credits until they produce the product. So it's almost an incentive built into business plans to allow them the confidence to go ahead and really create the plants. But then again, remember, it's not actually cash that the government is outlaying. It's actually money that they would forego if and when these ever got off the ground. So the truth is, if these plants never get off the ground, then the likelihood is the government won't ever spend the money. But the government has got to be seen to be doing something here, because the message they're hearing loud and clear from business right now, and it doesn't matter whether you're Orica making explosives and ammonia and fertiliser, or whether it's BHP or whether it's Brickworks or whether it's other big companies, they're saying we have a choice right now, and we can invest in America where they will give us genuine subsidies, where the gas prices are basically a quarter to a third of the price of Australia, and wages there are also under control. So their returns are greater in America than in Australia right now. And part of the structural problem the government has not really addressed at all is that we have become less competitive and therefore less profitable as a nation to do business in. And that is a fundamental problem that government has got to address.
Terrific, Ross. As I said, you're the guru. Thank you for all of that. We're right across what we need to know. We'll get into the politics now with Andrew Clennell. Thank you, Ross Greenwood.